Number 1. Adnan Syed. He sat in a courtroom in September 2022 as a free man for the first time in nearly a quarter century. He was freed in September 2022, but the system reinstated his conviction less than a year later. This isn't a simple tale of guilt or innocence, but a complex, agonizing mystery that refuses to stay buried. It is the story of a family that won't forget and a justice system still chasing the truth behind an 18-year-old girl's death. Hae Min Lee was never the kind of person who could simply vanish into a crowd. Born in South Korea in 1980, she moved to America in 1992 with her mother and her brother, Young. By her senior year at Woodlawn High School, she had become a local star. She was a star athlete and honor student, who classmates called magnetic, with her entire life spread out before her. During that time, she was dating another senior named Adnan Syed, a teenager who was widely considered popular and well-liked. Syed was deeply active in his local Muslim community and earned the genuine respect of all his teachers. Friends saw him as outgoing, though he and Hae kept their romance quiet to respect their family's cultural and religious differences. They split by the fall of 1998, and by the next January, Hae was already dating someone else. Then, on January 13th, 1999, she vanished after school and never made it home. Police found her car abandoned in a Baltimore neighborhood days later, with all her personal belongings still sitting inside. Her family waited in agony for a month until a man walking through Leakin Park on February 9th made a discovery. He was moving through a dense, wooded area in West Baltimore, a place notorious for being the city's favorite dumping ground for secrets. He tripped over a shallow grave containing Hae Min Lee, who had been manually strangled to death. Detectives immediately focused on Adnan Syed after cell phone records allegedly placed his device near Leakin Park that night. Yet the most devastating evidence against him came from an entirely unexpected witness. A friend named Jay Wilds told police that Syed showed him Hae's body in a trunk and he helped bury her. For his testimony, Wilds walked away with 5 years of probation and 0 days in prison. But Adnan Syed wasn't so lucky. Police arrested the 17-year-old on February 28, 1999. After an initial mistrial, a 2000 jury convicted him of first-degree murder, kidnapping, robbery, and false imprisonment. The court sentenced him to life in prison plus 30 additional years. He maintained his innocence from day one, but his case sat in total silence for the next 14 years. That silence broke in October 2014, when journalist Sarah Koenig launched a podcast called Serial. The reaction was explosive, with Serial becoming the fastest podcast in history to hit 5 million downloads. It eventually reached 300 million downloads and won a Peabody, raising massive questions about the original trial. Suddenly, the whole world was debating the validity of cell tower pings and the shaky, shifting testimony of Jay Wilds. Internet sleuths picked apart every minute of that day, while legal experts analyzed every technical detail. The case was debated in law schools and at dinner tables across the globe until 2016. A judge finally vacated Syed's conviction, ruling his original lawyer, Cristina Gutierrez, had provided a failed defense. Gutierrez, who died in 2004, never cross-examined the state's cell expert, leading the court to order a new trial. That ruling was upheld in 2018, then suddenly reversed by Maryland's highest court in 2019. The legal system was paralyzed by indecision, even as HBO released a 4-part documentary series that same year. Investigators then turned to advanced DNA testing that was completely unavailable during the original 1999 investigation. The results were shocking. Adnan Syed's DNA was nowhere to be found on any of the biological evidence from Hae's body. In 2022, State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby ordered a review and filed a motion to throw out the conviction entirely. The motion cited Brady violations, proving the original prosecution failed to disclose evidence that would have helped the defense. Most critically, the review uncovered 2 alternative suspects who were never properly investigated by the police. One had allegedly threatened Hae's life, and the other was later convicted of serial rape. On September 19, 2022, Adnan Syed walked out of prison after 23 years behind bars. Prosecutors dropped every charge 3 weeks later, but the Lee family was not finished fighting. Hae's brother, young Lee, argued he was never given proper notice and had to watch the hearing via Zoom. An appellate court ruled his rights were violated, and in March 2023, the conviction was officially reinstated. He's free, yet still a murderer. The High Court upheld that reinstatement. In March 2025, a judge resentenced Syed to time served under Maryland's Juvenile Restoration Act, meaning no prison return, though the murder conviction remains on his record. Adnan Syed, now 43, is a free man with a murder conviction. The case that changed how the world thinks about true crime podcasts remains officially unsolved. Lee's killer was never conclusively identified, leaving her family grieving in a case the world won't let rest. Was another monster already lurking in the Maryland woods? This next case pulls us into Maryland's darkest corners, to a man living beneath a trailer in Baltimore who allegedly turned his crimes into things he sold roadside. Number 2. Haden Clark. A neighbor saw a woman leave the Howling House on the morning of October 19, 1992. Her hair was long, wore women's clothes, and walked out the front door like someone with nowhere urgent to be. But Laura Hootling never actually walked out of that house alive. The figure was Haden Clark in a wig and Laura's clothes, using a disguise to buy time. Was anyone else safe from this chameleon? By the time investigators understood what they were looking at, a Harvard graduate was dead. A 6-year-old girl's case was about to be reopened. Maryland had begun to reckon with one of the most deeply disturbing figures in its criminal history. Haden Irving Clark was born on July 31, 1952, in Troy, New York. On the surface, his family appeared to be one of privilege and intellect. His father held a PhD in chemistry and worked for prominent companies. But behind the respectable exterior, the Clark household was fractured and completely broken. Both parents drank heavily. The home was volatile, and constant moving prevented the children from building roots. For Haden, something had already gone wrong early. Was he born a monster? He struggled academically, failed grades, and exhibited behavior that made teachers and classmates feel very uneasy. He developed a habit of targeting and harming animals belonging to neighborhood children who had bullied him, a detail that in hindsight reads as a warning sign no one heeded. He eventually enlisted in the U.S. Navy, where he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, a condition that would go largely untreated for the rest of his life. After his discharge, he became a drifter, cycling through odd jobs like cook, gardener, or handyman, never holding a position long before his behavior drove employers away. By the mid-1980s, he was periodically homeless, sleeping in his pickup truck, bouncing between relatives who grew increasingly alarmed by him but continued to let him through the door. What were they inviting inside? In May 1986, Clark was staying with his older brother Jeffrey in Silver Spring, Maryland. Jeffrey ordered him to leave after discovering him behaving inappropriately around his own children. On the morning of May 31st, 1986, Jeffrey took the family out of the house for a few hours. 2 doors away, 6-year-old Michelle Dorr was spending a court-ordered visitation day with her father, Carl. While Carl stepped inside to watch a race on television, Michelle wandered toward a neighbor's house for a playmate. No one was home except Haden Clark, who answered the door. Michelle never came home. Carl Dorr reported her missing. The investigation turned painful when Carl, pressured by police questioning, reached a breaking point. He briefly made false statements implicating himself in his daughter's disappearance. But where was the real killer hiding? By the time investigators cleared him, Clark had slipped off the radar. Michelle's case went cold. That disappearance remained an open wound. Then, in October 1992, Laura Hootling vanished. Laura was 23 years old and had recently graduated from Harvard University. She was intelligent, driven, and well-liked. Her mother, Penny Hootling, employed Clark as the family's gardener, a position that gave him access to the property. 1 week before Laura disappeared, Penny had an argument with Clark over tools she believed he had stolen from her. She confronted him. She then left town on a business trip, leaving Laura alone. On October 19, 1992, Laura did not show up to work. A neighbor reported seeing a woman leave the house, but the posture seemed off. Police soon arrived at the house. In Laura's bedroom, luminol testing revealed blood on the mattress. A fingerprint was lifted from a pillowcase and on Laura's nightstand hairbrush. Forensic analysts found something unexpected, a single synthetic hair, the kind found in a wig. Investigators located Clark's storage unit in Rhode Island. Inside, they found women's clothing and wigs. FBI forensic analysts at the lab in Washington, D.C. compared the hair from Laura's brush to fibers in one of those wigs. The match was exact in every measurable detail. The woman the neighbor had seen leaving through the front door was Haden Clark, dressed in Laura's clothes, walking out of a house where he had just committed a murder, performing normalcy. Imagine writing your victim's name on a check for the very rope you will use to kill her. Haden Clark did exactly that before his arrest on October 22, 1992, leaving a signed receipt for his crimes. Records show he also purchased duct tape and a bedsheet sized to match Laura Hotling's mattress just before she vanished. By June 1993, a second-degree murder plea earned him 30 years, but the horror was barely beginning. Prison did not silence Haden Clark. While behind bars, he began bragging to cellmates about the disappearance of Michelle Dorr. In 1994, 2 inmates faked interest in writing his biography just to keep the killer talking. Clark took the bait. The inmates immediately funneled those chilling admissions straight to the prison staff. By 1998, authorities had Clark on video answering questions about his role in Michelle's case. Prosecutors won a second-degree murder conviction in October 1999, even without her physical remains. Clark received another 30-year sentence. Then, on January 7, 2000, he led police to Route 29. In the Maryland woods, they finally recovered Michelle's remains 14 years after she disappeared. The confessions continued. Clark eventually claimed to have killed dozens of people, starting in his teenage years. He identified a victim on Cape Cod from 1974. He led police to his grandparents' property, where they found a bucket containing over 200 pieces of jewelry. Rings and necklaces filled the container trophies from his victims. Laura Hotling's high school ring was inside. The sheer volume of items stunned law enforcement. Some claims matched unsolved cases. Others remained unverified. Then there was his brother. In 1984, Bradfield Clark committed a homicide in California with methods mirroring Haden's. 2 brothers, 1 bloodline, the same darkness. Defense lawyers cited his paranoid schizophrenia and a childhood defined by utter chaos in court. Prosecutors focused on the evidence of planning. The rope, the check memo, the wig, and the evidence removal proved this was not an impulse. Haden Clark is currently serving 70 years total for 2 murders and a robbery. He remains behind bars in Maryland. He never explained everything, and his true victim count remains a mystery. Our next case moves to a newsroom. A man with a shotgun and a grudge. Jarrod Ramos walked through a door and changed American journalism forever. Number 3, Jarrod Ramos. During the shooting, a reporter under a desk at the Capital Gazette was live tweeting the events. He described the sound of the gunman reloading. He typed in real time because that is what journalists do, even while waiting to die. That image of a reporter working from the floor while being hunted defined 2018. The man responsible had been planning this specific afternoon for nearly 2 years. Jarrod Warren Ramos was born in 1979 and lived an invisible, isolated life. He lived alone in Laurel, Maryland. His only attachment was to his cat. Neighbors saw him as a withdrawn man who was sensitive to slights. He was the kind of person who kept score. In 2009, Ramos reconnected with a former high school classmate on Facebook. He started a harassment campaign of emails and messages that lasted for months until she feared for her safety. She went to the police. In 2011, Ramos pleaded guilty to criminal harassment. He received probation for the misdemeanor. For most, it would be a lesson. For Ramos, it was the start. The Capital Gazette is a long-standing community newspaper in Annapolis. They covered the county for centuries and ran a factual article about his court case. The piece was titled, "Jarrod Wants to Be Your Friend," and used only public court records. Everything in that article was accurate. Ramos read it and decided his life was destroyed. He lost his job. He became estranged from his family and refused to take any responsibility. Before the first shot, he studied a manual to fake insanity. He blamed the newspaper for his failures, targeting the reporter and the courts. In 2012, he sued for defamation. The case failed. He appealed, but the courts rejected him again in 2015. One judge noted that his legal complaint proved he had a fundamental misunderstanding of what defamation law is and is not. That defeat didn't end his obsession. It acted like a lit match in gasoline. For years, he mailed terrifying threats to everyone connected to his failed defamation lawsuit. The paper's former editor called police in 2013 to warn them about his dangerous, escalating behavior. Records show no action was taken. Later, police found letters where Ramos wrote about his murderous plans with chilling directness. In one letter to the judge who ruled against him, he claimed the judge helped him reach a legacy and stated in writing that he planned to enter the Capital Gazette offices with the objective of killing every single person present. He wrote those words long before he carried out the attack. Trial testimony confirmed Ramos chose a specific time with calculation. Thursday afternoon, June 28, 2018. He knew an afternoon meeting would pack the office with employees. He had been planning this massacre for nearly 2 years. To prepare, he spent 18 months sitting on a legally purchased 12-gauge shotgun. On the morning of the hit, he mailed final packets to 3 people involved in his lawsuit. At 2:30 p.m. on June 28th, Ramos arrived at the Gazette offices on Bestgate Road. He wore shooting glasses and ear protection. He used a security device to block the rear exit, trapping everyone inside. He shot through the front glass door and began a slow, methodical walk through the newsroom. Survivors said he moved with purpose. 5 people died, including editorial page editor Gerald Fishman. He killed Rob Hyacinth, 59, assistant editor and brother of the best-selling author Carl Hyacinth. He murdered John McNamara, a sports reporter who was weeks away from finishing his 4th book. He took the lives of Rebecca Smith and Wendy Winters. Winters was 65 years old. The reporter charged the gunman with a trash can and a recycling bin, screaming to distract him long enough for her co-workers to escape the building. Police found him hiding under a desk. He refused to identify himself. Fingerprint analysis finally confirmed his identity. 2 other employees were left with injuries. Survivors testified about hiding under desks and stepping over their colleagues' bodies to escape the carnage. One reporter hid under her desk with an intern while watching a friend get shot just feet away. The newspaper still published the next day. The editorial page was almost blank, a silent tribute to the colleagues meant to fill it. Time magazine later named the victims 2018 Persons of the Year, alongside other journalists, killed for their work. They were titled The Guardians in the War on Truth. In October 2019, Ramos admitted guilt to 23 counts, including 5 murders, but his lawyers argued he was not criminally responsible due to insanity. This trial focused only on his state of mind. Everyone knew he was the shooter. The question was whether he understood that mass murder was wrong. The defense claimed he had autism, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and a delusional disorder. They argued his obsession with the Gazette was a psychosis that made him lose the capacity to recognize his actions as criminal. 8 experts testified over 3 weeks, but the state had a devastating detail. Prosecutors countered with evidence of his calculation. Ramos told a doctor he had been studying a medical manual to fake the symptoms of mental illness during evaluations. He wasn't insane. He was engineering a fake defense to save himself. A psychologist testified that 8 hours of testing showed 0 evidence of the disorders the defense listed. Prosecutors called him a calm narcissist on a revenge mission who remained compliant after the massacre. The jury took less than 2 hours. On July 15th, they found Jarrod Ramos legally responsible. A judge sentenced him to 5 life terms without parole, the maximum the law allows. He received another life sentence for the attempted murder of a survivor. Then came 25 years for assault and 220 years for the firearm counts. All sentences run consecutively. His total, 6 life terms plus 345 years. A decade-old minor court plea sparked the deadliest newsroom massacre in Maryland history. 5 journalists died over one single, accurate news report. Ramos remains inside a Maryland State Correctional Facility with no path to release. Following the verdict, Wendy Winters' youngest daughter said she was ready to finally forget his name forever. Our next case leaves the media behind and enters a Maryland jail where the most dangerous man in the building wasn't serving time. He was running the building. It wasn't number 5, Joseph Palzynski. A 12-year-old boy unlocked his front door because he simply did not know any better. He had heard the name on the news, but the man on the porch looked like someone he used to trust. Before his family's lives shattered, he trusted this man, so he let Joseph Palzynski inside the house. The lock clicked, and a 97-hour nightmare began playing out live for the entire state to watch in horror. Joseph Chester Palzynski was born on November 11th, 1968, in Baltimore, and according to everyone who knew him then, he grew up in a home that was not abusive. His parents were attentive and kind, but during his teens, everything changed. Those closest to him blame one specific event, a horrific school bus accident that caused a very severe head injury. The man who walked away from that crash was no longer the same. He became violent and erratic, prone to rages that forced his family to seek psychiatric help. The hospital system cycled him through and sent him home. Doctors diagnosed him with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, depending entirely on which facility evaluated him and on which particular day. He spent a total of 3 years in mental health hospitals and 2 years in prison for assault, creating a revolving door of failed treatments. His history of battery began as a teen. In 1989, he went to prison for attacking a girl, beginning a decade of many terrifying, broken relationships. The Baltimore Sun reported on 7 different women who each eventually discovered the same horrifying truth about his nature. He was charming until the moment he turned terrifying, becoming an attentive but controlling shadow who refused to let go once things ended. By early 2000, an unemployed Palzynski was living in Essex, Maryland, as his relationship with Tracy Whitehead collapsed. Tracy had reached her limit, seeking safety with her neighbors, George and Gloria Shank. The Shanks were in their late 40s, living in the quiet community of Bowley's Quarters near the Middle River today. Their neighbor, David Myers, lived nearby. The Shanks protected Tracy because they knew she was in danger, unaware Palzynski was already violating parole when he arrived. On the morning of March 7, 2000, Palzynski shot and killed George and Gloria. He murdered David Myers next, then forced Tracy into his mother's car and sped away. 3 people were dead in a quiet suburb, and Baltimore County Police launched an immediate, massive manhunt. Every available officer was deployed, setting up roadblocks and a perimeter across a wide swath of the eastern county. For 10 days, Palzynski moved through the region almost entirely on foot. He survived in the woods using years of outdoor skills, eluding one of the largest local manhunts in the history of Maryland. During those 10 days, Tracy managed to escape from her captor. Police kept her in a Holiday Inn under 24-hour guard, with no access to news, so she wouldn't know the full scope of the tragedy unfolding outside her door. On the night of St. Patrick's Day, 2000, Palzynski slipped through the heavy police perimeter. He arrived at the home of Tracy's mother, her boyfriend Andrew, and 12-year-old Bradley McCord on Lang Road in Dundalk today. Bradley opened the door. He let the man in, and before anyone could react, Joseph Palzynski had the doors locked, and his own terrifying demands made very clear. He had 4 weapons and one single demand. He wanted to speak with Tracy. Psychiatrists warned that giving in would likely result in him killing Lynn Whitehead while Tracy was forced to listen in. It was the ultimate punishment for ending their relationship. Negotiators said no, and the standoff held as news helicopters broadcast the high-stakes drama to a captive audience. The neighborhood was cleared as residents were told to shelter inside a nearby school. Police severed the phone lines and used a robot to deliver a cell phone for the negotiators. Attorneys and specialists from Shepherd Pratt Hospital were brought in to help. A 12-year-old boy sat alone with a killer because his parents chose to leave him behind. Negotiators worked grueling shifts just to keep Palzynski engaged. They pivoted the conversation whenever he grew restless, stalling for time while he fired rounds out the window simply because he was bored. Inside that house, young Bradley McCord did the only thing a child can do in a nightmare. He adapted to the madness. He told interviewers years later that over those 97 hours, he had somehow earned Palzynski's trust. He sat on the floor, he watched and waited, later describing how Palzynski sat on the toilet with the door open, wearing 20 pairs of socks and staring. The boy had no choice but to endure the killer's all-crazy eyes. By the evening of Tuesday, March 21st, Lynn Whitehead and Andrew McCord reached a final, desperate conclusion. They could not wait any longer. Quietly, Lynn crushed Xanax pills and stirred them into a glass of iced tea. Palzynski drank it and fell into a deep sleep on the sofa. Andrew McCord was the first to move. He scrambled out the front window and hit the ground with a loud thud, but Palzynski did not stir. Lynn followed. They left Bradley asleep on the kitchen floor, a choice they would later explain through a haze of grief and crushing guilt. They feared waking him would cause a noise, alerting Palzynski and ending with all 3 of them dead. They assumed the police would retrieve him, so they stepped out into the arms of the waiting tactical team. But Bradley was still inside with the sleeping killer, when the tactical team finally breached at 10:45 p.m. Officers flooded the structure and found Palzynski on the couch. When he reached for a weapon upon waking, they opened fire. The autopsy recorded 27 gunshot wounds in the 31-year-old. Bradley McCord was rescued unharmed. In the years since the ordeal, he has spoken publicly about the trauma. He struggles with complicated feelings toward the parents who left him behind and how that night redefined his life. Lynn moved to Florida. Tracy Whitehead, whose departure triggered the entire spiral, eventually married and started a new life in Virginia. The standoff on Lang Road stood as the second longest single-person hostage barricade in American history at that time. A woman had legally purchased the weapons Palzynski used on his behalf. She was later convicted and sentenced for straw purchasing firearms for a known felon. The case remains a focal point in discussions regarding mental health policy and domestic violence intervention. It exposed the massive gaps in a system that touched Palzynski for a decade but never stopped the inevitable. Our next case moves from a Dundalk row house to the streets of Baltimore, where a badge became a shield for a criminal empire. For years, no one stood in their way. This is number 6, Wayne Jenkins. Inside the trunk of a Baltimore police vehicle, federal agents found a bag containing ski masks, gloves, and armed robbery gear. The driver was Sergeant Wayne Jenkins, the leader of the city's elite gun trace task force. This plainclothes unit was celebrated for taking illegal weapons off the streets of one of America's most violent cities. But while bosses praised him, Jenkins was using his authority as a license to pillage. He was born in 1980. By every institutional measure, Wayne Jenkins was a natural-born police officer. He served 3 years in the Marine Corps, where he was known for iron discipline and natural leadership. He joined the Baltimore Police Department in 2003 at 23 years old. He rose quickly into plainclothes units, the kind of squads that operated with total independence and zero oversight. Supervisors idolized him, and one commander recalled Jenkins bragging about his seizure numbers at police headquarters. He was so vital to the unit's output that his absence was felt by the entire department. When he took paternity leave, his commanders complained about the drop in productivity. Other officers spoke of him with reverence. One cop recalled thinking he was like King Kong, wondering how he was doing it and why he couldn't be like him. The answer was simple. He was a predator. Jenkins' earliest confirmed theft dates back to 2011. By the time federal investigators had built their case, the scale of his corruption was absolutely staggering. The Gun Trace Task Force was a specialized, elite unit. Formed in 2016 to stop Baltimore's rising violence after the Freddie Gray riots, it was weaponized from the start. Jenkins and his crew targeted citizens and dealers alike, performing illegal searches without a single warrant. They planted evidence on the innocent and filed fraudulent reports to bury their tracks. Most importantly, they stole cash and narcotics directly from the very people they were supposed to be arresting. They robbed drug dealers blind during routine traffic stops and warrant executions. Jenkins bypassed the courts, using illegal trackers to stalk high-value targets and hijack their product. They stole narcotics from actual police busts and funneled them back onto the streets. An associate testified they moved $1 million in drugs while running a massive overtime scam. Jenkins pocketed $170,000 in 1 year for hours he never worked. In 2010, their corruption turned lethal long before the unit officially formed. Jenkins and Daniel Herzl staged a botched robbery disguised as a plainclothes police stop. 2 terrified men fled, striking and killing 86-year-old Elbert Davis in the ensuing chaos. Jenkins planted heroin on the survivors, framing them for a crime they never committed. The truth remained buried until Jenkins finally apologized to Davis's daughter years later in court. The Federal Bureau of Investigation built the case through wiretaps and deep financial audits. Recordings caught Jenkins panicking as the feds closed in, ordering his men to stay silent. He told them to keep their mouths shut and stick to a single story. In March 2017, 8 task force members were indicted on federal racketeering charges. The news paralyzed the city. 6 officers pleaded guilty, while 4 others agreed to testify against those who didn't. Detectives Mamoudou Gondo, Jamel Rayam, Maurice Ward, and Evodio Hendricks became the star witnesses. They dismantled the defense of Daniel Herzl and Marcus Taylor during a 2018 trial. Cooperating officers exposed every dark detail of how the criminal unit actually functioned. Body camera footage proved that the official police reports were nothing but lies. On February 12, 2018, a federal jury convicted both Herschel and Taylor. During the 2018 sentencing, Jenkins stood before the judge and wept openly. His voice cracked as he finally apologized to the family of Elbert Davis. He offered an apology to Umar Burley, the man he framed and sent to prison. Jenkins admitted that seeing his sons through prison glass was his greatest punishment. "It is my fault," he said, before receiving 25 years in federal prison. Taylor and Herschel got 18 years, while Thomas Allers was sentenced to 15. Ward and Hendricks received 7 years, with others getting up to 20 years. They all entered federal custody, but the damage to Baltimore was far from over. Thousands of criminal cases were reviewed, leading to many convictions being completely overturned. Innocent people had been imprisoned based on the word of a state-sanctioned gang. The city eventually launched an independent investigation into the department's systemic failures. The lead investigator noted that Jenkins showed zero interest in actually helping the review. He was more focused on meeting movie producers than providing any real accountability. HBO adapted the story into We Own This City, based on Justin Fenton's book. John Bernthal's performance in 2022 brought the scandal to a global audience. It highlighted how a decade of zero oversight allowed a criminal gang to wear badges. Wayne Jenkins remains in federal prison with a release date in the late 2000s. Our next case involves a Baltimore officer and a man in a police van. What happened in that vehicle would soon set the entire city on fire. Number 7. Freddie Gray. The transport van made 7 stops that changed everything. For 45 minutes, a 25-year-old with a broken spine lay unsecured on the floor. By April 12, 2015, Freddie Gray was found unconscious and not breathing. He never woke up again. 7 days later, he was dead, sparking 2 years of explosive trials and unrest. His neck snapped like he had dived into shallow water, yet he was shackled inside a police transport van. This autopsy finding would eventually set Baltimore on fire and redefine 21st-century American policing. Freddie Carlos Gray Jr. was born on August 16, 1989, and grew up in the Gilmore Homes of West Baltimore, a housing project defined by extreme poverty and decades of systemic neglect by the city. Alongside a twin sister, he suffered through lead paint exposure that left him with documented developmental and health struggles. Prior drug-related arrests made him a familiar face to the officers who patrolled the city's western district. By 2015, the 25-year-old was living in a city that was still processing the death of Trayvon Martin, still absorbing the national outcry regarding police conduct, and still carrying the weight of decades of toxic tension between its own residents and the police department. At approximately 8:39 a.m. on April 12th, Gray was standing at a Gilmore Homes corner when he locked eyes with Lieutenant Brian Rice, a bike officer. Gray fled. Rice radioed the chase. Officers Garrett Miller and Edward Nero joined the pursuit on their bicycles. Within 60 seconds, Gray surrendered at Presbury and Mount Street after Miller drew his taser. He was handcuffed, searched, and placed under immediate arrest. Officers reported finding a switchblade, but State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby would later challenge the claim. She determined the knife was a legal, assisted opening blade, meaning the arrest itself was made without any lawful justification. Bystander Kevin Moore started recording on his phone. His footage captured Gray face down on the pavement, screaming, as officers loaded him into a van with limp legs. The video spread quickly as neighbors gathered. They loaded Gray without a seatbelt, a direct violation of a safety policy implemented just 1 year prior. The van then made stop after stop across the western side of Baltimore, picking up another prisoner. At stop 5, Officer William Porter checked on Gray and heard him begging for a medic. Porter would later testify that he gave the driver a specific warning. He told Officer Caesar Goodson that Gray needed a hospital because he would not pass central booking. The van continued anyway. At the final stop, officers opened the rear doors and found Gray completely unresponsive. Help was not called until 30 minutes after the van arrived. Maryland's chief medical examiner determined the cause of death was a high-energy injury to the cervical spine, mirroring a shallow water diving accident. The manner of death was ruled a homicide. The examiner concluded the injury likely happened while the unbelted, shackled man was thrown inside the moving van between the second and fourth stops. Freddie Gray died on April 19, 2015. Baltimore held its breath until the funeral. That afternoon, the city erupted into the Baltimore Uprising, which began as a peaceful protest before shifting into widespread civil disorder across multiple neighborhoods. A CVS pharmacy was torched, its burning shell appearing on news screens across the globe within hours. Governor Larry Hogan declared a state of emergency and mobilized the National Guard. Schools closed, and a citywide curfew was enforced. The NBA even postponed a playoff game, as hundreds were arrested over several days. Those images of Baltimore on fire became the most analyzed news visuals of the decade. On May 1st, Marilyn Mosby stood at the War Memorial and announced criminal charges against all 6 officers involved in Gray's arrest. The moment was stunning. It was unprecedented for an American prosecutor to charge an entire group of police for a single in-custody death. Charges ranged from assault and reckless endangerment to second-degree depraved heart murder. Officer Goodson, the driver, faced the most serious charge of second-degree murder. Trials began in late 2015 and continued into 2016. The first trial for William Porter ended in December 2015 with a hung jury and a mistrial. Edward Nero and Caesar Goodson, who faced the murder charge, were both acquitted in their trials. Lieutenant Brian Rice, the ranking officer, was also acquitted. After 4 trials resulted in no convictions, Mosby dropped all remaining charges in July 2016. The federal government looked at the evidence and chose to walk away. In September 2017, the Department of Justice announced it would not pursue civil rights charges against any of the 6 officers. Not a single officer was ever convicted for Freddie Gray's death, though by September 2015, Baltimore did pay a $6.4 million civil settlement to his family. This payment remains one of the most substantial settlements in the history of the city. At the same time, Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake committed to equipping the entire police department with body cameras. But the Department of Justice wasn't finished, launching a massive separate inquiry into the Baltimore Police Department's fundamental operations. By August 2016, they released a scathing report detailing a systematic pattern of unconstitutional stops, searches, and arrests that relentlessly targeted Black citizens. These were the exact same neighborhoods that Freddie Gray called home. In April 2017, a federal consent decree was enacted, legally forcing the city to implement sweeping departmental reforms. Many of the officers involved returned to their shifts, including Officer Goodson, who, after his acquittal, joined the department's high-tech surveillance unit. Officer Alicia White saw all her charges dropped before her career took a stunning turn. In February 2024, she was promoted to captain to lead the Public Integrity Bureau, the very unit that investigates officer misconduct. Freddie Gray's name evolved into a powerful symbol of a national crisis. It appeared on protest banners in cities miles from the Western District and became a fixture in legislative debates and policy shifts. It remains the focal point in every conversation about what happens when the people sworn to protect become the source of a community's fear. Our next case takes us northeast, where 2 young sisters vanished from a shopping mall back in 1975. The hunt for the truth would stretch across 4 decades before the mystery was finally solved. Number 8. The DC Snipers. Fear was so thick that people stopped pumping their own gas, choosing to crouch behind car doors instead. Citizens sprinted from stores to their cars in desperate zigzags, shoulders hunched, waiting for a shot that could come from anywhere. Everyone was running. Someone on television had suggested that moving unpredictably might make you a harder target to hit. Gas stations in Montgomery County hung giant tarps to hide customers from the road, while schools abruptly canceled all outdoor activities. The terror hit a breaking point when a 13-year-old boy was shot outside his middle school in Bowie just as he stepped off the bus. For 3 weeks in October 2002, the entire Washington metro area lived through a state of panic unprecedented in modern American history. The man behind the trigger, John Allen Muhammad, was born John Allen Williams in Baton Rouge on December 31, 1960. He enlisted in the Army in 1978 and eventually served in the Gulf War. He earned the Army's Elite Expert Rifleman's Badge, their highest marksmanship honor, and was trained extensively in combat engineering. After converting to Islam in 1985 and changing his name, those who knew him described him as both charming and commanding. He had been married twice, but both relationships had fallen apart. When his second marriage ended and he lost custody of his 3 children, his personality shifted toward a dark, violent obsession. His protege, Lee Boyd Malvo, was born in Jamaica on February 18, 1985, into a life of total instability. His mother moved constantly, leaving him with various caretakers before she eventually disappeared into the migrant communities of Florida. Malvo was only 15 when he met Muhammad in Antigua around the year 2000. Muhammad quickly filled the void in the boy's life, casting himself as a powerful father figure. They moved to Washington state under aliases, where Muhammad began a systematic process of psychological conditioning and ideological brainwashing. Through intense weapons training, he built a worldview for the boy where extreme violence was not just justified, but mandatory. Muhammad's master plan, which Malvo would later detail in chilling trial testimony, involved several distinct phases. Investigators believe the true goal was to kill Muhammad's ex-wife and seize his children back by force. The sniper attacks were meant to create so much random chaos that her murder would be ignored as just another senseless shooting. Muhammad also issued a $10 million extortion demand to the federal government. He told Malvo the money would build a compound in Canada to train homeless children as soldiers for a new society. Malvo believed him completely. Their campaign of blood actually began months before the world noticed in October. Starting in February of that year, they moved through Washington state, Arizona, Louisiana, Alabama, and Georgia. They left at least 7 people dead and many others wounded during their cross-country trek. Every bullet recovered from the victims would later be matched to a single Bushmaster XM-15 rifle found in Muhammad's car. By September, the pair had quietly returned to the Washington, D.C. area. Between September 5th and 15th, they shot multiple people in Maryland, including a pizzeria owner who miraculously survived the attack. A hole for a barrel was cut into the trunk of a blue Chevy. Before the October spree truly began, a Silver Spring clerk barely survived. On October 2, 2002, at 6 p.m., 55-year-old James Martin was gunned down in a parking lot in Wheaton, Maryland. This was the first murder officially tied to the spree. By 10 o'clock the next morning, 4 more victims were dead within a few miles of each other. A landscaper cutting a lawn, a cabbie at the fuel pump, a housekeeper vacuuming a hotel entryway, and a man waiting at a bus stop. Who was pulling the trigger? The hits came so fast and without logic that investigators struggled to even confirm they were connected. By the end of October 3rd, 5 lay dead in Maryland. The sheer randomness of the violence created a pervasive terror. Victims were just living their lives. 35-year-old Conrad Johnson, a father of 2 from Oxon Hill, was standing on his bus steps in Aspen Hill on October 22nd when he was killed. He was the final confirmed victim of the D.C. area terror. The youngest Maryland victim, 13-year-old Iran Brown, was shot outside Benjamin Tasker Middle School on October 7th while stepping off a bus for class. He survived, but a child shot at school on a normal morning haunted an entire generation. Why target a child? Montgomery County Police Chief Charles Moose became the public face of the hunt for the monsters. He held daily press conferences, watched by millions, talking to the public while using carefully coded statements to speak directly to the shooter. The snipers left clues tarot cards at crime scenes, one chillingly marked with the words "Call me God." They phoned tip lines multiple times, making demands and threats. But the police were missing one link. The investigation spanned jurisdictions and involved hundreds of FBI agents, state troopers, and local departments. The break came from nowhere. Investigators traced a fingerprint from a crime scene to Lee Boyd Malvo via immigration records. That single print connected Malvo directly to Muhammad. Detectives then found Muhammad registered a blue 1990 Chevrolet Caprice in New Jersey, plate NDA 21Z. That description went public October 22nd. 2 days later, at a Frederick County rest stop, a trucker spotted the car. Muhammad and Malvo were asleep inside. The trunk was modified with a small hole, a firing port for a shooter to lie hidden in the dark, aim through a telescopic sight, and fire at targets hundreds of yards away without ever being seen. Inside the vehicle, investigators recovered the Bushmaster rifle, a victim's laptop containing maps of the scenes and escape routes, walkie-talkies, a digital recorder for extortion calls, and a scope. Every piece of evidence pointed at them. The prosecutions were complex across 2 states. Virginia moved first because its laws allowed the death penalty for juveniles like Malvo at the time. Muhammad was tried in Virginia Beach in November 2003 for killing Dean Myers and convicted after 6 hours. He received a death sentence. Malvo was tried in Virginia, convicted of capital murder, and given life without parole. In Maryland, Muhammad was tried in May 2006 for 6 murders. Malvo took the stand to testify. Muhammad was convicted and handed 6 additional life sentences. Malvo pleaded guilty to the Maryland charges in October 2006 and received 6 life terms. On November 10, 2009, John Allen Muhammad was executed by lethal injection at the Greensville Correctional Center. He was 48. Lee Boyd Malvo remains behind bars, though Supreme Court rulings on juvenile sentencing changed his status. Resentencing proceedings in Maryland have faced repeated delays. In September 2024, a judge postponed his hearing indefinitely. His 6 Maryland murder convictions remain. The D.C. sniper attacks killed 10 people in 3 weeks. 6 of them were murdered in Maryland. A memorial to the victims stands at Brookside Gardens in Wheaton, the county where the first shot was fired and the county that suffered most. The same county where gas stations once hung tarps from the pumps. But there are even older nightmares. 40 years before the snipers, 2 girls went to a Wheaton mall for lunch and never came home, starting one of the longest and most heartbreaking cold cases in Maryland history. Number 9. Lloyd Lee Welch. For 40 years, a monster's true face remained hidden inside a dusty evidence file that no investigator bothered to open. Sheila Lyon was 12, and Katherine was 10 when they became the most famous missing children in Maryland history. It was 1975. They were daughters of John Lyon, a well-known Washington radio host, and they lived in Kensington, a quiet, peaceful little neighborhood. This tree-lined community felt safe enough for parents to let children walk alone to the mall on a spring Saturday afternoon. On March 25, 1975, Sheila and Katherine decided to do just that. They never returned, and their abductor eluded justice for 42 years. The morning they vanished began as an ordinary day for everyone. It was 5 days before Easter. The sisters left home before noon, walking half a mile to Wheaton Plaza shopping mall. They ate pizza at the Orange Bowl and looked at the colorful, seasonal decorations. Their big brother, Jay, spotted the pair at the Orange Bowl around 2 in the afternoon. That was the final confirmed sighting of either girl by a loved one. When they failed to return, their parents panicked. Their call triggered the largest missing person search in the history of the entire Washington metro area at that time. Hundreds of officers and volunteers scoured every inch of the woods. They searched storm drains, empty buildings, and ponds. Scuba divers dragged local rivers while investigators interviewed every single nursing home resident. Search dogs tracked for miles in every direction. They found nothing. Not a shoe, not a coat, no trace remained. Detectives interviewed thousands, identifying several potential suspects to investigate. One primary person of interest was a man named Ray Molesky. Witnesses described an adult male carrying a tape recorder at the mall that day, acting strangely. A police sketch was then widely circulated. That drawing drove the hunt for years. But there was another sketch, one the public never saw. A teenage friend of the girls had noticed something that afternoon that left her feeling deeply unsettled. A young man with long hair and acne scars was following the sisters, staring with a truly haunting intensity. She reported this to police, and they created a composite drawing. It was a perfect likeness, but the investigation was stalled. Detectives were already obsessed with Molesky, so this second sketch was simply tucked away into a file. It moved through internal channels, but was never shown to citizens. 1 week later, 18-year-old Lloyd Lee Welch told a Wheaton Plaza security guard he was at the mall when they vanished. He claimed to have seen the kidnapping take place in person. Police gave him a polygraph test, which he failed. Why would a witness lie like that? Investigators dismissed him as an attention seeker. The case went cold. Decades passed by, and Molesky was never charged with the crime. Other leads evaporated. The Lyon family lived for 40 years without any answers. John Lyon eventually worked as a victim coordinator for Montgomery County, helping other families survive the very system that had failed to give him closure. His son Jay became a cop. The disappearance of Sheila and Katherine was woven into the fabric of their lives and the history of the whole region. For a generation of local children, the sisters became a symbol of how fast the world could turn dangerous. In 2012, the Montgomery County Police made a choice. They would treat the cold case as if it were brand new. Sergeant Chris Homrock was assigned to review every single record. He pulled 20 boxes of witness statements, photos, and old reports that gathered dust for decades. Hamrock found that second sketch and the brief note about Lloyd Lee Welch. He decided to dig into Welch's criminal history. When he pulled a mugshot from Welch's 1977 arrest, he was shocked. He held it next to the 1975 drawing and saw the truth. The same face, hairline, and features were staring back at him. Why was he ignored? Welch was 60, serving 33 years in prison for molesting a child. In October 2013, investigators went to Delaware to finally sit across from the man himself today. What followed was the most psychologically demanding interrogation campaign in state history. They spent 2 years trying to break his silence. Over 11 sessions, Welch proved to be manipulative and contradictory, saying anything necessary to protect his own skin from the truth. For a long time, he insisted he had only witnessed the actual abduction. He blamed his cousin Teddy, who was only 11 in 1975, leading the detectives on a total wild goose chase. But detectives kept returning, finding gaps in his stories and walking back through them. Would he ever give them the location? In May 2015, everything changed. During their 11th session, Welch started describing his father's house in Hyattsville. He mentioned a concrete basement that had only one single exterior entrance. He detailed exactly what he saw in that basement in the days after the girls vanished. Blood coated those basement walls for 40 years. Welch claimed he only watched, then fled, but he was not alone. Police executed a search warrant at 4714 Baltimore Avenue in Hyattsville. Forensics experts sprayed luminol throughout the back basement room. Under ultraviolet light, they discovered what 4 decades of cleaning could not hide. Traces of blood covered the floor and climbed the walls to the ceiling. Did they stand a chance? In July 2015, a grand jury indicted Lloyd Lee Welch on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Officials announced the charges in Wheaton, steps from the mall where the girls vanished 40 years earlier. Then his cousin spoke. Henry Parker told police he helped Welch incinerate 2 massive duffel bags on Taylor's Mountain in 1975. Parker remembered the weight of those bags. Each weighed 70 pounds and smelled of rotting flesh. Though he claims he never looked inside, the girls were never found. On September 12, 2017, Lloyd Lee Welch entered a Virginia courtroom and pleaded guilty to felony murder. He was 60 years old and still insisted he never personally touched those children. Without physical remains, investigators had no way to prove his claim was a lie. His defense attorney maintained that other men were the primary killers in the basement. The judge sentenced him to 48 years, consecutive to his 10-year sentence for molesting a child in Delaware. Given his age, authorities confirmed the likelihood of him ever leaving prison was 0. John Lyon, the girl's father, stood before the cameras to thank the investigators. He praised the cold case unit for their 40-year dedication, calling it a beautiful investment. His son stood nearby. Jay, now a Montgomery County police officer, grew up in his sister's shadow and finally saw their case close. The bodies of Sheila and Katherine Lyon remain lost to the earth. The final moments in that Hyattsville basement are known only to those present, and most are now dead. This case remains one of the longest spans between a murder and a conviction in American history. Technology didn't solve it, and neither did a sudden confession. A detective pulled an old file, compared a sketch to a photo, and saw what was there all along. Our final story takes us to Baltimore, to a man living in the dirt beneath a trailer. He ran a roadside stand and hid a nightmare inside every sale. Number 10, Joe Metheny. Customers lined up because the food tasted so good. The stand sat right on the truck routes of South Baltimore. It was a basic pit setup, the kind of roadside operation found in any blue-collar neighborhood. People bought a sandwich and went about their day, never knowing the ingredients. They didn't know because some monsters wear a perfectly ordinary face. That lack of knowledge makes Joe Metheny the most disturbing case in Maryland history. Born on March 2, 1955, Joseph Roy Metheny's family life shattered early. His father, an alcoholic, died in a car wreck when Joe was only 6 years old. His mother worked multiple jobs to support 6 kids, but lawyers later claimed the children were neglected. They alleged he was passed around to other families in informal arrangements. His mother denied this, describing him as a polite student who was never mean or cruel. Somewhere in those early years, a predator was born. He joined the Army in 1973 at 19 years old. After his service, he drifted through labor jobs, lumber yards, and truck driving. He eventually landed a job driving a forklift at a South Baltimore pallet factory. He was a steady worker, and peers found him to be intelligent and well-spoken. At 6'1" and 450 pounds, friends ironically nicknamed him Tiny in local bars. He poured his paychecks into alcohol, crack, cocaine, and heroin. In 1994, Metheny returned home to find his girlfriend and son had vanished. She fled her addiction and him without a single word. He did not take it well. He became obsessed, hunting for her through the city's most dangerous drug dens. Joe Metheny's barbecue customers loved his special meat, never knowing its horrific origin. He prowled Baltimore's streets, searching for his missing girlfriend. He later told police that he believed people were playing games, purposely hiding the truth from him. In 1994, that obsession took him under the Handover Street Bridge, but his girlfriend was nowhere to be found. Instead, he cornered Randall Brewer and another man named Randy, who couldn't give him the answers he demanded. Court records show he executed both of them with an axe before dumping their bodies into the Patapsco River. He got away with it. In 1995, a jury couldn't convict him without bodies, so he walked free. He later bragged about those murders and claimed more victims that night, though detectives never found any proof. Stepping out of that courtroom as a free man didn't reform him. It emboldened him. He realized he could beat the system, and his next moves would be far more surgical and predatory. Joe set up a home base in a trailer tucked away on the grounds of the pallet factory where he worked. It was an isolated lot on Baltimore's southwest side where he began hunting vulnerable women involved in street-level sex work and addiction. He chose them specifically because he believed the police wouldn't look too hard when they eventually stopped showing up. He dangled drugs and a warm place to stay as bait, drawing them back to his trailer before ending their lives. In 1994, Metheny killed Kathy Ann Magaziner and buried her in a shallow hole right there on the factory grounds. Months later, he actually went back, dug her up, and did something even more grotesque. He detached her skull and tossed it in the trash, leaving detectives with only partial remains to recover years later. Forensics eventually identified Kathy Magaziner using dental records. By November 1996, he murdered 23-year-old Kimberly Lynn Spicer and hid her under his trailer, but he slipped up. His mistake was Rita Kemper, who survived his brutal assault and fled the trailer to find the police. Police swarmed the factory grounds and found Spicer's body exactly where Rita said it would be. They cuffed him on December 15, 1996, and his calm cooperation caught the detectives completely off guard. He didn't stay quiet for long. He started detailing the murders of Spicer and Magaziner almost immediately. He admitted to the men under the bridge and several other victims he picked up along truck routes. He claimed at least 13 victims in total, and even pointed the police toward where he buried Magaziner. He mapped out locations and described his methods with a cold tone that made the detective's skin crawl. Then came the most harrowing revelation. Joe Metheny didn't just kill these women, he dismembered them for a reason. He harvested their flesh and ground it together with beef and pork inside that trailer. He kept the mixture in his freezer and sold it from a mobile barbecue stand near weekend truck stops. According to him, no one could tell the difference between his special blend and the real thing. He claimed people actually complimented the sandwiches, so he kept hunting new victims whenever his supply of meat ran low, simply killing to keep his stand in business. Authorities were never able to prove every single one of those gruesome claims. His statements were detailed, but his history of manipulation left investigators questioning what was real. Was it the truth or a performance? Here is what the police actually confirmed. They verified 2 murders, 1 abduction, and a 2-year pattern of targeting Baltimore's most forgotten citizens. In 1997, a court convicted Metheny of kidnapping and assaulting Rita Kemper, handing him 50 years. A year later, he was found guilty of murdering Kimberly Spicer and received a death sentence. During the sentencing, he told the room that he would never apologize for what he did. He called an apology a lie, admitting he killed because he loved the rush and the high it gave him. There was no deeper motive. He simply enjoyed the act of taking a life. By late 1998, he pleaded guilty to killing and robbing Kathy Magaziner, earning himself another life sentence. In the year 2000, a court threw out his death sentence on a technicality, changing it to life without parole. Joe Metheny didn't seem to care one way or the other about the change. He spent the rest of his days at the Western Correctional Institution in Cumberland, Maryland. He spent his time giving interviews and making dark claims that the police could never fully prove or disprove. On August 5th, 2017, guards found Joe Metheny dead in his cell at age 62. He sold burgers mixed with human remains to unsuspecting travelers. He took that secret to a grave with a strictly hidden cause of death, never once expressing remorse for the specific women lost, whose names now haunt legal archives, and the others, the Papsco River, never surrendered. His word is the only proof they existed. Today, the massive pallet factory where he worked and killed has been torn to the ground. The roadside stand is gone, too. But the case remains a terrifying example of violence hiding in plain sight. How did he lure them? It happened on the roadside, behind a smile, inside the most ordinary meal imaginable.